Hi there, it's 17th July 2019. This is Broadcasting Scotland at 7. And, well, the first story of this evening with my guest, Chris McCusker, is the successful election of the new EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, I beg your pardon. Well, you know, I do try with these names and everything, but it's till it gets into my head. Anyway, she won this vote by 56 votes, which I think is not a bad sum to be. I mean, there was talk on some of the channels that wasn't much of a majority, but 56 out of 383 votes to 327. So she got a 56 majority. It's not that bad, is it?
I think she would be quite pleased at that.
I mean, you think of all the other votes.
It's actually quite monumental that to note that she is the first female in that position within the EU. So that goes a long way for equality. And it was nice to see her in support of Nicola Sturgeon, saying that she's a great fan of her First Minister.
Yes, she did say that, didn't she?
Which is a nice wee transition from John Paul Juncker's good relationship with Nicola that had been built up over a number of years, you know. So.
And Alan Smith said, I was particularly struck by her commitment, that is Ursula's commitment, to a gender-balanced College of Commissioners. This will in itself represent a major cultural change and builds upon the experience of the Scottish government. So there we are, Europe's following Scotland. Why not?
Well, you know, I think it just bodes well for our argument that we work well with our European partners, as opposed to the relationship that we've got with Westminster, which is, I would suggest, is pretty much irretrievable now. And it does show that we are willing to engage with people that are willing to engage with us, you know, and that can only be a good thing for Scotland going forward.
She said that she will reject candidates for the commissioners' posts until she gets the balance right there with the gender balance. The other thing that Alan Smith said was that it remains the thing about Brexit is and she's already said that she's willing to go for an extension beyond that which has already been thing. And he says Scotland voted to remain in the EU referendum, and the elected team of SNP MEPs are committed to stop Brexit. We believe she will be an important ally in that fight.
Yeah, I believe so. And whilst she obviously has to adopt the same stance as John Paul Juncker, insofar as they can't directly get involved in sort of like one side or the other with regards to Scotland and Westminster. But I think that they are making all the right noises for when the time is right. You know, to unequivocally say, right, well, you know, you currently meet the criteria to be a European country within your own right. There's no sort of like added on waiting time and stuff like that, you know, and welcome into the community.
Yeah, I think the message of giving Alan Smith that job too, isn't it? Because he's the leader of that group.
Well, yeah, correct. And I alluded to that a couple of weeks ago, if you remember. I did say that he had been given that job, and he would be hard pushed to be given that job up, as hinted by John Paul Juncker. Because these positions are not given out lightly. So, you know, as I say, with everything's, it's very much like a football match. And that, you know, we can only deal with the next issue ahead of us. So
See, as far as Scotland's concerned with this thing, obviously it's a very, very positive thing for us, all of that we've just spoken of. But there are still quite a few people in Scotland who are not for the EU. And I just wonder what they think we're going to do instead, and what's the prospect of actually sort of helping them to understand that the EU is what we've got.
Yeah, it is a bit of an enigma, especially when you drive around the Highlands and Islands and you can see just, road billboards. This was accomplished by money from the EU and such not and what have you.
I was actually thinking to ask people to, and I'll ask you. I'm asking you out in our Broadcasting Scotland. Take photographs of anything you see that's got this logo on it that says it was built with money from the EU. I saw one in it was by the statue of Walter Scott, Kelso.
All right.
Yeah, there was one there on the side of I think a telephone exchange or something. And anyway, take photographs, send them to me at Broadcasting Scotland. All right, thank you. Or tweet them to them to Broadcasting Scotland. There's a Twitter account that you can put them all up on there. I wonder if anyone will do that. It'd be nice, wouldn't it? Okay, yes. So this is another little part of this, though, I think we should talk about, because I joked yesterday with Fraser, who was here with me, Fraser Wilson, about it being warm in the studio tonight. And of course, warmth and summer go together, hopefully, sometimes. But the climate change is a serious issue, and this is another thing that Ursula von der Leyen is really committed to. Alan Smith said she's committed to real action on climate change, which remains the biggest growing problem facing our continent and the world, and which can only be tackled by concerted effort. I hope she puts fine words into action.
Yeah. And interestingly as well, Ian Blackford levelled roughly the same question to the Prime Minister today and PMQs with regards the Tories' approach to the climate change. It wasn't PMQs, it was questions to Rory Stewart, the DFID Minister, I believe his title is. That they were saying that they are on target to meet their expectations and are actually polls ahead at this moment in time, and there's nothing really to worry about it, and it was all in hand. Well, I don't actually. Something as big as climate change, I don't think can be treated as it's in hand, folks. You know, watch this space. It's something that requires radical action now, and just to quote figures and bandy words around is, not helpful. But then that's what the Tories like to do.
I think that as many people as possible should go out and plant a tree. I think that's the best thing we can actually do.
They do it in Australia. My elder brother emigrated to Australia and sadly relinquished his. Well, it was a British passport, but relinquished his Scottish citizenship. And they gave him his citizenship and gave him a tree.
Right.
And he, you go out to the outback or wherever you go,
well,
and you
in
plant
the
this tree.
In the Moluccas, when they had the Spice Wars, the people used to plant a clove tree for every child that was born. So every child had its own clove tree. A little bit of history for you. Okay. Yeah, so there was one other little thing, because we mentioned Rory Stewart, and I noticed just as we came through the studio door that the Ebola crisis in the Congo has been accepted by the World Health Organization as an international crisis now, and that will get more resources across. There's been 1,600 folk died in this latest outburst already, and Ebola has now got vaccinations which can help it. But I just thought we'd better pop that in, since you mentioned Rory Stewart.
Yeah. Again, going back to what I said earlier about warm words. It was actually highlighted that whilst being in that position, Rory Stewart has actually done some, quite good stuff. I hate to sort of point that out to you folks,
but I mean,
credit where credit's due.
Yes, sure.
But I am slightly sitting in trepidation at the fact that the good work that he has done may be undone by the next administration. Because, as we know, Boris is not a great fan of the money that we give out to the foreign aid, and that is one of the red lines that the ERG lead on. And in order to placate the ERG, I think Boris will put a pencil right through that, without blinking an eye, which is going to be really sad.
Have to see what he does, of course, and that's coming very close on our heels now, isn't it? It's next week, I think, we hear about the actual result for that. Whichever one gets it, I'm not sure where it leaves us in Scotland. But Theresa May still has the opportunity to revoke Article 50. As you well know, because we've said it to you many times, Alan Smith and Joanna Cherry and a bunch of other guys went to the European Court of Justice, and they found out that it was possible for the UK to revoke this Article 50 thing. All they've got to do is to send a letter to the Commission President and say, look, sorry, we made a mistake. But there's some stuff here. I'll read a little bit of this to you. Theresa May has a week left to revoke Article 50 before the UK suffers a damaging no-deal exit from the European Union. I don't still think people understand. If you want to keep things going as nicely as they are, you've got to keep doing the things that you do to make that continue to happen. If you suddenly stop doing all that, it's not going to happen anymore, and things will change. Anyway, there was Andy Whiteman. He was saying a few things this morning. He says the power over our future is about to be placed in the hands of a dangerous fantasist, more interested in his own career than the livelihoods of the citizens of the UK. Who could he be talking about? I think Mr. Johnson again. But it says here that Theresa May, this is what Andy Whiteman said, Theresa May has just days left to see the sense and revoke Article 50 before she hands the reins over to someone who clearly doesn't have our best interests at heart.
Well, to my mind, unless she's going to take a day off next week and go for a wee wander through a field of wheat, to have another epiphany, shall we say. If you remember, she famously done that a couple of years ago. I don't think that she'll do that. And you can bet your bottom dollar that it won't be within the gift of Boris Johnson to do that either.
Did you catch any of Theresa May speaking at the Chatham House today?
I did not. No.
I mean, really, she was throwing the blame at everybody, and as if it's it's almost like she's in a goldfish bowl.
Yeah. I can imagine that she would want to shed as much off of her own back, because don't forget she's now got to look forward to putting her feet up, possibly charging £5,000, £10,000 for an after-dinner speech.
Well, they give Boris 95,000.
Yeah, but Boris is an attraction.
And Theresa speaks as if she's a vicar, so why wouldn't they give her more? Did you know, Chris, where she and her husband have bought a house?
Please tell me it's
somewhere. Shall I tell you? It's in Ireland, Southern Ireland.
Southern Ireland.
Yeah, beautiful sea views, I expect.
I knew it'd be somewhere within the EU.
Anyway, good luck to her. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on a bit more with Mrs. May then, because Ian Blackford has been saying a few things in the Parliament today, and at PMQ's, Ian Blackford MP condemned Donald Trump's recent tweets as a textbook racism and called Mrs. May to also condemn the racist go-home vans introduced when in coalition government with the Liberal Democrats. The SNP Westminster leader criticised the Tories for also remaining silent when the government imposed damaging, diversive policies like the hostile environment and the deportation of asylum seekers. And over the racist columns by Boris Johnson. Scotland is looking in horror as the Tories lurch even further to extremes and emulate the toxic and divisive policies of Donald Trump and Nigel Farage. We'll just read one more sentence from here, I think. Theresa May bears personal responsibility for her role in imposing the racist go-home vans and the hostile environment and the Windrush scandal, the detention of child migrants and the deportation of asylum seekers.
But it's whilst those charges were being levelled at her, she does what she does at every PMQs, and she deflects it off on, unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn and the SNP as well, because when Jeremy Corbyn challenges her on Islamophobia, she will then just bat that back to him, and she'll talk about anti-Semitism. And then when the SNP challenge her on any one said issue, she just then hits it back to us by saying, well, you're only interested in independence. So, I mean, that is the deflection tactics that she's adopted, because she has no defence here. You know what I mean? No human being in the world could qualify their rationale for physically sending out vans that was blatantly told people to get out of this country and go home. And, again, it's the very same thing with what's happening with Trump, telling these 4 women to basically go back to their own countries. And
when they were born in...
Well, 3 of them were born in America.
One was Somalia.
She'd
been there since she was 12.
So, I mean, again, the chat that we had when I came in off camera about the rise of right-wing populism is something that Boris Johnson will keenly adopt in order to garner support from the Brexit Party followers. Not necessarily the Brexit Party. I'm actually talking about the people who have naturally migrated to the Brexit Party from the Tories.
Well, anyway, Mrs May was quite correct about Ian Blackford deflecting it back to referendums and stuff, because that's the last sentence he said, actually, because he was going to say it. But the people of Scotland deserve the choice of a better future. It is no wonder that support for independence is growing in Scotland, and a majority of people want a fresh referendum. I don't think there's much argument about that now, is there?
No, there's not much argument, and every week, as viewers will possibly know, those that keep up with the weekly events, that poll upon poll is actually showing that support is growing.
Yeah, I wonder whatever. Tommy Shepherd put in for that freedom of information, didn't he, about that one that the government was supposed to have done?
They'll never release that one in a month of Tuesdays. That would be the hammer blow in the Tory coffin if that ever came out. And if it is true as to the figure that was alluded to being 72%, that would just sound the death knell for the Tory party in Britain.
Yeah, I interviewed a few folk down in Lockerbie a few days ago, and there was a man who spoke very eloquently. Actually, he was just a normal everyday guy, but he said that when he went out canvassing for the referendum in 2014, he found a lot of folk who shut the door in his face and got very cross with him. He said now nobody does.
Yeah.
And a couple of them in that particular group said, "Oh, I think that it's inevitable now. That's one of the phrases people use. I hope we might be able to bring you that video one day, but maybe in the future we can do a program with it.
I've noticed a few people out on the. I've not been able to go out in the campaign trail very much in recent times, but the response that I'm getting on from several branches posting out their pictures and saying that they're having positive engagement on the doorsteps now through their door knocking and even on street stalls, stuff like that. So I would like to see an upsurge of membership within the wider Yes groups as well, because we have to remember that it's not just independence isn't just about the SNP, although they are the only credible party that can deliver it. There are more people within the wider Yes movement who don't necessarily subscribe to the SNP party.
Should we just go a little bit off piste here?
Go on. We don't normally do it.
I might get into trouble, but you know, there's been quite a lot of in the press criticisms about the phrase has been inaction from the SNP. I mean, my reading of the situation is quite different, because to me they seem to be acting a lot. I mean, they're pushing this bill through the Parliament so we can have a second referendum, but. I mean, do you follow any of that stuff, or have you a little comment? Not too long, maybe, because we've got other things to talk about. But just
I do,
nick off
and
just for a minute.
I do, and I don't, and I try not to engage in negative social media with regards our one common goal, which is independence, and that's not me not wishing to challenge the SNP on stance, their policy. I suspect that you're maybe alluding to something that was suggested by Chris McKelney and Angus Brendan McNeil, and I am confident that we have learned the lessons of 2014, and we are quietly getting on with what Nicola has got planned for after October. So I wouldn't dive into this sort of like, as I say, negative social media, and you know, I'll keep my powder dry on that one, Lewis.
Okay. Well, the next story, I can actually tell you a story with this, because
that was very Val Doonican like. Oh no, Max Bygraves. I want to tell you a story.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, there's a story about slavery, because. Many years ago, when I was up in the north of Scotland, there was a young woman who was found in a situation where she was being kept as a slave, and my pals found her, and they actually brought her to my house, and my wife then and I were absolutely horrified to hear her stories. But there's a story here now about Kirsty Blackman, SNP MP, challenging Theresa May to apologise to the hundreds of child victims of modern slavery. And that young woman, she wasn't much more than a child, I must say to you. She was a young teenage woman. And but anyway, let's go on with this here. She said of child victims of modern slavery who refused asylum or discretionary leave to remain under her watch as Prime Minister. Kirsty Blackman said, Theresa May claims to care about people whose lives have been destroyed by modern slavery. They have refused the lifeline they desperately need, and this is her legacy, and one to be ashamed of.
Yeah. Again, it is another policy that Theresa May should be ashamed of. In fact, the whole of the Tory government should be ashamed of it, and it's one that definitely needs challenging. And I think it will only now that it is being highlighted, hopefully it can be tackled. But again, this relates to the the overarching question about the hostile environment that has been nurtured by the Tory party. If you go back through history to the days of Enoch Powell, the modern day Tories are just basically carrying on his mantra. It is right to point out that, again, it's not just down to the ethnic communities. You know, it does happen to white people as well.
Yes,
and
that young woman was.
And it has to be highlighted that people... There was also a case in America, I believe, where there were 2 girls kept captive for about 14 years or something like that. They'd been kept in a cellar or whatever. I don't know if it was slavery or if it was more.
That's more of a kidnapping,
kidnapping thing or something like that.
This modern slavery, I mean, they do it really, I suppose, by fear. Mm-hmm. They keep people in and they bring people in. They sex traffic is a form of it, isn't it? Yeah. When you get, I mean, you know, but working on the farms, there was those people on Morecambe Bay who drowned, wasn't there, a few years ago when they were with gang masters? There was that awful story in the news a while back where some people, some traveller people, had a group of people, you know, absolutely captive and feared to go out in case they were. Yeah. And of course, if you've got, you know, terror in you. Yeah, I mean, if you can be told you'll be arrested, and it must frighten these poor people out of their minds.
Well, yeah, and again, you know, obviously the use of slave labour has been well documented throughout the years. You only have to look back to the 1920s and 1930s for that. But what it's. Even if you know, and I don't mean to make light of this, but you know, the Tories have got a track record in this, because I'm of an age where when I left school, I was given £25 a week in order to work a 40-hour week. Now, you know, to my mind, that is slave labour. And that's when I became politically aware at the tender age of 16 that this was wrong, that I was being mistreated in order to learn a career, because I was always led to believe that when you left school you got an apprenticeship, after a couple of years you qualified, you know, and
I've got to say to you, Chris, I'm not going to buy this one too much, because I got £25 for my first summer season.
I was on a yacht scheme.
I don't know how old you are.
I was on a youth opportunities programme.
And I worked longer hours than you, what I was going to say.
I had an easier paper round than you, that was what it was. But no, this was rolled out under
we
Margaret
mustn't
Thatcher.
get too levitated by this, because it is a terrible
it's a serious issue, yes. But, you know.
With the hostile environment surrounding, I mean, Kirsty went on to say the reality is that the harmful hostile environment will be Theresa May's toxic legacy. She had the opportunity to apologise and she didn't take it. She should hang her head in shame. And, you know, I mean, we are so fortunate, actually. I mean, you know, for all the things we sit here night after night talking of, all the terrible things we bring to our audience is attention. We are fortunate in this country because actually we do have relatively free speech. We are allowed to walk down the street, and it doesn't happen everywhere. And most of us live kind of a free life. I'm not going to say it's 100% because I'm not sure that's actually possible anymore. No. And of course, the financial constraints on each and every one of us determines a lot of what is possible for us to do. Yeah. And but to bring people in from other places and kind of goes against the grain too. You know, they want to keep all these folk out because they don't want immigration, and yet there are people who are obviously pulling others from Eastern Europe and various other places and making them work for nothing. Yeah.
And I think that we're going to go on to another point which is pertinent to this, and that's Chris Stevens, my comrade in the Westminster Group. He heads up our trade union group. Chris made the point on the Serco blockchain evictions, that these people are still have their claims ongoing and shouldn't be put under this duress. I can't remember the minister's name that answered Chris, but she basically alluded to the fact that once people's asylum claims have been exhausted and they have the right to remain, it is up to them then to transition from the benefit that they get as an asylum seeker to the mainstream benefits. Again, fine words again, Lewis, but unless there's people to facilitate this happening, then people are always going to be stuck in this rut of catch-22, which they cannot get out of. Because, again, you've got these people coming here with a limited amount of understanding of the English language and are, due to psychological trauma, are reticent to engage with the community unless they feel 100% safe. And it takes an awful lot of time to build up trust. These people are going to carry on accepting the meagre payment that they get as an asylum seeker and not being able to transition onto a state of job seekers allowance, then being able to go out and change their life, as the Tories constantly say that more and more people are getting into mainstream jobs and stuff like that through their job program and stuff like that. And all
there's actually a story further up our list today, but I'll bring it up now because you mentioned Serco, because this rapid rehousing fund has been increased. The help for homeless people in stable accommodation, into getting people into stable accommodation. I think this is all part of this idea of accommodation first or housing first, isn't it? An investment will increase the local authority funding being provided for rapid rehousing from 15 million to 24 million over the next 3 years. This help will transform services so people facing homelessness can either immediately or as quickly as possible be placed into permanent, stable accommodation, which will with the support they need. The COSLA Vice President Graham Houston said tackling homelessness is a key issue for councils across Scotland. We welcome the extra resource to help local authorities begin to move towards rapid rehousing. We will continue to work in partnership with the Scottish Government to ensure councils have the resources needed. This money is part of the Scottish Government's 50 million Ending Homelessness Together Fund.
This is actually evident this week. Kevin Stewart, MSP, along with Tom Arthur and I believe Derek Mackay managed to get in on the act as well. But they were busy this week opening some new social housing in my constituency, or my neighbouring constituency, the wider constituency of Renfrewshire, which is south and east. And that is again, I think we've had this conversation where you only need to jump in the car and drive, and you can see excellent building projects going on either side of whatever motorway you're travelling in. And this is something that the Scottish Government are getting better and better and better at. And funnily enough, one of the Tory MPs, just to diverse, very quickly, one of the Tory MPs, and I can't remember his name, he was complaining about the standard of housing that was being engaged with in conjunction with the Tory party. I believe that the company was Persimmon Homes, who were basically they were producing houses down in the south of the country that were deemed to be substandard for human habitation. because
I don't know. I mean,
of
do
the
you know who said that?
construct. Do you know, and I hate to generalise, I can't remember the chap's name, but I can picture him. He is the chap in the Tory benches. I believe he's got cerebral palsy.
Yeah, but it was I mean, the obviously we can't see. We haven't got anybody from Persimmons to defend themselves.
No.
I suppose we should be a bit careful.
Well, no. On this case, it was said in the House of Commons, so therefore it will be documented in Hansard.
All right, I see.
You know, it was a question directly levelled to Theresa May in today's PMQs.
In today's PMQ?
Yes.
Maybe our producer can look it up.
And I honestly can't remember the chap's name. Halfon.
Say it again.
Is it Halfon?
Halfon?
Mark Halfon?
Mark Halfon.
Mark Halfon. Well, I think I believe it was him. And yes, it was definitely levelled at the Prime Minister for engaging Persimmon, and whilst it was whilst they are producing this standard of house building.
It's interesting, isn't it, how all these things, because this is often a story, isn't it?
Yeah, but
over many decades.
The other thing that I wanted to point out from that is the fact that if you notice, the unionist parties in Scotland never challenged the Scottish Government on their housing policy and what they've actually built, because they've, you know, I mean, obviously the Tories have never been in government, you know what I mean, but when Labour were in government, you know, they didn't exactly cover themselves in glory with the amount of houses that they built. Do you know what I mean? So it's an area that, you know, the Scottish Government are doing, and they're doing it well. And what the Tories and Labour try to do is they try and pin holes, or should I say pick holes, into the most difficult of competencies that we've got, which
health
is obviously health and education. And they see that as a weak spot, and they'll just keep chipping away at that. Of course,
if they highlight one little thing that goes wrong, it looks like the whole thing's going wrong.
Yeah.
When there's some beautiful new schools about. I was over at Kinghorn the other day. Beautiful place over there. And I noticed there was one. I was in Auchinleck the other day, and they're building a new place there, I think. Anyway, this next story is about Boris Johnson again, and the possibility of the Tory party giving a coronation in an undemocratic way. The UK government must allow vote on a new Prime Minister. Now that's quite a big issue, isn't it? Quite a big idea. The SNP's bill to prevent undemocratic Tory coronation. The SNP has called on Theresa May to allow time for Parliament to debate a new bill that would require a vote on any future Prime Minister, warning against an undemocratic Tory coronation. Now, with the government in Holyrood, the whole of the cabinet is voted for, isn't it, by the Parliament?
Correct. Yeah.
And a similar situation happens in the European Parliament, as we've witnessed with the first story brought tonight. Pete Wishart, MP, said it is a national scandal that the next UK Prime Minister will be chosen by a few thousand Tory party activists without Parliament or the 66 million people who live here having any say. And I think that you noted something about the actual electoral college of the Tory party.
Yeah. And this is actually researchable, is that 15, 16 and 17-year-olds within the Tory party membership are allowed to vote in the Tory leadership campaign.
And yet they're fiercely opposed to lowering the normal elections and yet here in Scotland at the 2014 we allowed the 16-year-olds to take part.
But again, if that doesn't highlight the inequality,
it's a bit of hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy, inequality. There are many
15-year-olds
superlatives that you could use for this.
How do they get to the age of 15? Because at age 16 you can kind of comprehend, because people with permission can get married at the age of 16. They can join the armed forces at the age of 16. What is the criteria for giving 15-year-olds an authority? How many 15-year-olds do they have, I wonder?
I honestly don't know. I really don't know. But
I mean, actually, the membership is pretty low anyway, isn't it?
Yeah. But again, I'm not speaking out of turn. And insofar as this is researchable, I found it on the Independent website, and it is there. It is public knowledge, and I'm pretty sure that Pete Wishart will be. Hopefully tuning in for this, but hopefully he'll be doing a bit of research on this and highlighting it, because as you say, it is absolutely it reeks of hypocrisy, and again that's just your Tory party. Do you know what I mean?
Pete went on and said all devolved nations already have similar rules in place. In Scotland, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, and her entire cabinet had to be nominated and approved by the Scottish Parliament. It is time that for Westminster to follow Scotland's lead and enter the 21st century.
Yeah. It's a thing that won't happen within Westminster. They are stuck in another century.
So more than that, isn't it? Because the precedent is always the most important thing in English law and in English Parliament. We look at what's gone on before, and Berco's come under quite a lot of criticism for saying that if we keep doing things the way they've always been done, nothing will ever change.
Yeah,
and he's actually stood up to that quite well in his tenure of the speakership. But I mean, Scotland's law is never based on that. Scotland's law is always looking to say, why did this happen? That's the kind of distinction, isn't it? The English base it on the precedent, but the Scots look for what caused this to happen.
Yeah. But you see that again. That's why I say that the Westminster Parliament is stuck in an epoch of Victorian values, and as you say, they will favour that as opposed to the way that we challenge things, and how things evolve, and that is on not a decade or a millennia or anything like that. The Scottish Government is progressive enough to do it on a yearly basis, and the same goes for the EU as well. And unless they are willing to change, I remember back when Mhairi Black was first elected. She done a couple of lovely chats where she let the SNP membership know exactly what it was like to be inside that bubble of Westminster, with all these quirky wee ways, and you
can find these on the Facebook pages and the
yes,
internet.
Back it into YouTube. You'll find it there. It's absolutely brilliant.
And you'll find them on Independence Live,
on Indie Live as well. And she talks about how they are cajoled into imitating farmyard animal voices and stuff like that. When they're chuntering from a secondary position, and folk walking about in knicker stockings and swords and all the rest of it, and it's absolutely archaic, and unless they drop that, then people's perception, the Americans' people's perception of modern day London just now is very much of the royalty being an offshoot of the Victoriana age and stuff like that, and that's why they play on that.
See, there's another aspect, isn't it? Now, if you're government ministers and secretaries of state, whatever you want to call them, are elected by the people in the House that have been elected, there's a democratic thing in that. Now, when we look at Boris Johnson and Mr. Hunt, there was a story the other day, one of them will be in number 10 and one will be in number 11. That's hardly a democratic idea, is it? And it also gives a UK Prime Minister a lot of
carte blanche,
and then you get people like Mr. Gove saying, "Oh well, I think Boris will make a great Prime Minister when only a few weeks ago you said, "Oh, he's a terrible guy," and because what's Mr. Gove looking for? Is he looking for a job? I don't know.
I've got a sneaky feeling that we're making a nice segue into another topic here, where a certain Ruth Davidson has now gathered
Take us there, baby.
She has basically gathered support within the Scottish Tories to come out in favour of Mr. Johnson.
And yet she's tossed and turned. Didn't she say she wanted Hunt the other day? And before that, it was Savage Javid.
Yeah.
And I suppose you've got to ride the wave as it goes. But
the again, when we're talking about earlier on about hypocrisy, she was asked about her professional relationship with Mr. Johnson. And everybody knows his views with regards to LGBT rights and his racist outlook, shall we say? And she indignantly said that he is not someone that she would like to do business with on a day-to-day basis. And then all of a sudden now she's come out and she's championing his cause and stuff like that. And this is the Tories at their weakest. This is where the Tories are at their weakest because they always buckle in the wind.
Something else here, Chris. It's something to do with this thing where you can just say one thing one day and another thing the next day, and everybody's forgotten what you said the day before.
Well, David Mandel's got it down to a fine art. You know how many times has he actually said one thing, and done a totally different other thing to Scotland. A famous picture of him and his son Oliver outside the fish processing factory in Lockerbie. We want to save jobs and all the rest of it, and then 2 weeks later it gets sold to a company and relocates to Grimsby.
Yeah, it's Annan, isn't it? The fish factory down there.
Yeah.
I do know that. I mean, Tommy Shepherd said, look, this is embarrassing, shameful and utterly unforgivable behaviour from the Scottish Tories, and his final proof that they would do or say anything to sell out Scottish interests.
Yeah.
The craven pledge of loyalty to Boris Johnson is the ultimate humiliation for Ruth Davidson, whose authority and status are now shattered beyond repair. It was previously claimed that Davidson would tell her MPs to champion the Scottish national interest. Today, that claim looks like a particularly unfunny joke.
Well, I mean, honestly, to revel in a bit of Glaswegian from my dear old grandmother, she would honour Ruth Davidson as someone who would be prepared to sell her granny for a tanner. Do you know what I mean? And it's shocking. It's careerist politics at its worst. As anything
the other thing, the problem is it's more than a tanner, isn't it? If you remember what a tanner is, it was sixpence. I'm sorry, sixpence, but it was old money he's talking about. But he's an old man, you see. But you see, I read this out yesterday in the show yesterday. Boris Johnson. This is what Tommy's saying, actually, I think. But says Boris Johnson as Prime Minister could be a total disaster for Scotland, threatening a devastating no-deal Brexit, which would destroy, and I said this yesterday, 100,000 jobs and cost every person £2,300 a year.
But it's not just, Tommy Shepherd is an MP that I have got the utmost of my admiration for. I worked on his campaign when he went for deputy leader, and I make no apologies, but sadly I didn't get that. He's a pragmatic trade unionist, and he's a passionate champion for human rights and the various work that he does as as all the parliamentary group do, I must add, is absolutely invaluable. But what I would suggest, I would go one bit further to what Tommy is saying there. And he's saying 100,000 jobs. We have to look at the bigger picture here. And if you put 100,000 people who are working, if they have what you would call a 2.4 family, then obviously you have to multiply those jobs by the human cost, and that's 4 people on top of that. So you are looking at least quadrupling that actual figure as to how this Brexit is going to hurt individual people in the community. And I'm talking about from Waynes as young as primary school and upwards, folk in further education and stuff like that who are still being supported by their parents, and even if they're not supported by their parents, who are trying to support themselves through the shocking rise in the housing market and the private rental sector. There is just no, I'm sorry, but there's just no good outcome of this shambles that that we are currently trapped in. And to be honest with you, I'll make a passionate plea to the First Minister right now: get us out of here.
Yeah, it's not only the families, is it? Because if a person has a good, well-paid job, if there is such a thing, and he goes around or she goes around and they go to the coffee shop or the cafe,
Yeah.
those guys who benefit from it was the snowball effect of money when I learned economics. And the way that you make things work is by getting the money to move from hand to hand to hand to hand. A thing I remember seeing years ago in Hong Kong. People used to go so quick that he'd buy from him, he'd buy from him, he'd buy from him, and that makes the world go round.
I have to point out that I said pretty much as what I'm just about to say at this moment in time. I said this about a year ago, and I have got a suspicion that Nicola is going to hold off calling. Obviously, she'll be forced into it if it's a general election, but with regards to independence, I think that she is going to hold off until the impact of those 100,000 jobs actually hits people who are earning more than, say, for argument's sake, £45,000. That will be the reality button that will say to people, that £45,000 has now been taken away by the actions of the Tory party, and if you're not in an independent, or if Scotland isn't an independent country, we have got nothing that we can do about that. Yeah. And it is a fine line, because you've got people in your community that earn 45, 55, 65,000 pounds plus. People in my community, many more throughout the communities in Scotland, and it is a safe bet to say that people in that benchmark of earning capacity are predominantly Tory and Liberal voters. It might be wrong for me to pigeonhole them in that way, but I've very rarely seen very rarely seen a lefty earn that amount of money, in my lifetime.
I've never earned that.
Are you a lefty?
The older I get, the more I get. I don't really want to go to this next story, to be honest, because I think it's just too appalling for words, but we did mention it last night. There's not a racist bone in my body, said Mr. Trump. And someone came back with him and said, no, you haven't got a racist bone, but your brain and your heart are in that direction. Yeah. And I don't know who said it, but I heard it. So the US House of Representatives voted on Tuesday to condemn President Donald Trump for racist comments against the four minority Democratic Congresswomen. A symbolic measure aimed at shaming Trump and his fellow Republicans who stood by him. The vote was 240 to 187, mainly split upon along party lines, but actually 4 of the Republicans did vote against Mr. Trump on this. But the polls from the Republicans, he's still riding high.
Yeah.
It's made absolutely not one jot of difference to him.
Yeah. And again, this is something that I spoke to you off camera about before we came on air. That Trump knows. I mean, Trump's an old-time showman. Do you know what I mean? Not in the same style as Ronald Reagan. As he was famous for being an actor. But Trump is he's a sideshow showman, and he goes for the sensationalism, and he is pandering to that redneck community within America who have the white supremacist ideology and embittered into their DNA. And I'm talking about obviously folk that follow the Ku Klux Klan, the whole sort of like Confederate stuff there that seems to be a cancer in America as far as I can see. America stands on the principle of being the land of the free. Well, it's not that free to turn round to someone and say, "Go home, you're not wanted here."
Especially when they were born there, except for
Three
the one girl
three
who
of
was,
them were born there.
the
Yeah.
woman was born in Somalia. But
And
apparently these 4, they do work together, but they are considered in America to be really to the left, as you would put it.
yeah,
But socialists, which is almost, it seems, a dirty word within the American context.
well, also I would suggest that socialism has. Speaking as a socialist, socialism has always been a bit of a dirty word within mainstream politics throughout the last century, and an awful lot of there are 1,001 derivatives of socialism. Each and every person's idea of their own socialist values are unique to each and every socialist, to my mind, anyway. And when we discuss socialism, it's not a better reach for my copy of Marx and Engels. It's more to do with social equality and equality for your fellow brother, your fellow worker, and equality within your own community.
Let's just read. We've got one more little thing to do, so let's just read out what Nancy Pelosi said. These comments from the White House were disgraceful, disgusting, and these comments are racist. Every single member of this institution, Democrat or Republican, should join us in condemning the president's racist tweets. I think we'll just leave that one with that, because there's one other. Brings us back to Mr. Johnson once more, because Mr. Johnson had a big hand in this. Nazarene Zaghari-Ratcliffe was been reported to have had to be put into. Let me read this, because I got criticised the other day for using an old-fashioned word. Well, it's vanished off here, of course. It would do, wouldn't it? But she's been put into an asylum wing in the hospital. She's obviously having a very, very tough time. And of course, Mr. Johnson, with his mouth open in the wrong way, has caused a lot of this problem.
Boris Johnson obviously put his size 11s in it by suggesting that she was actually teaching journalism. And this poor woman has now ended up in a psychiatric unit.
I mean, we must say that teaching journalism here, that's a fine thing to do, but you put it in the wrong context, in the wrong place, in the wrong years, and it means something totally different.
And as I say, this poor woman has been through an absolute torturous time, and let's not forget as well, her husband has been put through a torturous time.
And a little baby girl.
And a baby girl. Yeah. And to his credit, he has stood in solidarity with her. And when she went on a hunger strike. He too went on a hunger strike in London. And he got an awful lot of press coverage from that. And, I've...
and there was an emergency question asked about this in the House today.
Yeah. And it's an ongoing subject, and I fear that it's not going to get any better with the installation of Boris Johnson as PM.
No. And we've got to finish the show now, Chris. Thank you very much for your time once more.
Not a problem.
You've got the camp bed up on the roof, I'm told, with your tent now, like Arthur Askey in days of old. So look,
and the
thanks very much
changing.
for watching us too. I hope that you had a good insight of all these different stories from Chris McCusker, who's obviously a very intelligent and very articulate man. And I thank him for his presence here and for helping me along. Thank you for watching. And tomorrow should be Thursday. Is it? I hope so. Gordon Ross should hopefully be here tomorrow with you. And I know that a lot of you enjoy watching him and his guests. So thanks very much for this, and we'll see you again shortly.